Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is Derek Kessen to talk about building teams. But I know there's a little more of a concrete example than that, but the general topic is building teams for nonprofits. So, Derek, welcome to the show.
Hey, Alex, so good to be with you.
So, I'm curious to know your superhero origin story. That is to say, how did you get started working with nonprofits in the first place?
Yeah, I guess, man, I don't know if I can really relate so much to the word superhero, because I grew up in a town with bring your tractor to school day. So I am a small town kid. I am very practical. And at the end of the day, any of the work that we are doing, we are hoping that it leads really directly to some concrete outcomes that people can tangibly, feel and see and hear. And so yeah, I don't know if I can really relate so much to that word, but yeah, so let's see, I grew up in central Illinois. I went to school at the University of Missouri. So again, another very practical place. Studied finance and economics and then moved up to Chicago right after that in about 2006. And so I worked in the financial markets for 13 years at a bond trading firm here in Chicago. And then after that in 2019 is when I started On Center. And so there's a whole lot that goes into how and why we started that, but that's really sort of my origin story, kind of all the way back to my more practical roots.
Well, I think, Superman lived on a farm, right? He had a tractor.
I think that's right. I think it was maybe Kansas or something, but yeah.
So from finance to nonprofit, that's a kind of not necessarily a big switch, but what was the pull then to start focusing your attention in the nonprofit space?
Yeah, so I had the privilege of working at the same company for about 13 years, and I learned a couple of really important things that are important for really any business, whether it's a for-profit or nonprofit. And today, our company serves about 40% of our clients are nonprofits, and about 60% are for-profit. And the two things really that I think I learned there, one was just always to ask this question, I wonder if that's true. And the reason we say that is a lot of the work that nonprofits are doing, a lot of the work that our other for-profit businesses are doing also is they're kind of pioneering in their space. They're moving into an area that someone is not being served by a traditional sector, or we're pushing into a geography where other people aren't ready to go, or to a population that people aren't ready to go. And so you're kind of rewriting the script. And what a lot of times ends up happening is we kind of use these generally accepted truths that we use for everyday life, and then we apply it to a place that actually hasn't ever been seen to work. And so we like to say when we're going in to a different place, let's not just automatically do it the way that everyone's always done it. Let's ask the question, I wonder if that's true. And so here's the way everyone's always done it. Let's actually unpack all of the assumptions that go into doing it that way, and see if that actually truly makes sense. And so we found that that actually ends up leading us to a lot of different approaches that are really better serving the communities that a lot of our nonprofits are working in. And so it's kind of that inherent intellectual curiosity. So that's one thing that I actually learned, believe it or not, in the bond trading industry before moving out of there. And so that was a really kind of, I think, formational aspect of how we kind of set up our business. The other one is really around, I kind of call it unlocking a different kind of economy. And so in the formal business sector, and nonprofits maybe don't have to worry about this as much on a quarterly basis, but certainly they do on an annual basis in annual reporting, is we're kind of driving towards these metrics that we have to show at the end of the day. And so in the trading industry, it's every day. It's make as much money as we can today before the end of the day. For a regular, Fortune 500 company, it's make as much money as we can before the end of the quarter for our earnings call. And for a nonprofit, it is, make sure that we've got our fundraising targets by the end of the year, and that we're able to, collect all of our monitoring evaluation information so that we can be reporting what our impact has been by the end of the year. And so how we like to think about this as a partner is, rather than us thinking about how we can make as much money as possible in the short term, we are a business, we have to make money at the end of the day, but we say, how do we serve our clients over the long term? And if I have to actually sacrifice a little bit today, I'll do that so we both win long term, right? And so then ultimately our client's success becomes our success, because we've got these long term loyal relationships that are really leading to productive outcomes, both for them and also for us, because they're going to want to keep working with us because we care more about their long-term success than we do about our short-term success. So those are kind of two things that I was learning in the trading industry, which might sound crazy to most people, assuming that everyone in the trading industry is automatically just kind of selfish. But I had the good fortune of working with a company that was really standing out in that way, of really caring about our clients long term. So I think how I ended up, getting back to your original question of how I ended up actually working with nonprofits was in 2019. I had spent the last 3 years studying organizational psychology and strategy at Northwestern University here in Chicago, as part of my MBA there. And I was leading a team of about 30 analysts at this trading firm that I was working at. And we had grown. I was probably employee number 60. We'd grown to about 350 people. And it was time for change. It was time to kind of like reorient our teams. And what I was noticing about myself during that time was that I was actually a lot better at these organizational things than I was necessarily about leading a team of analysts to develop, portfolio strategies for banks, and that there were actually better people on my team to lead that effort. And so I said, well, heck, who needs that? Who needs help with structuring their teams effectively? Who needs help with designing the culture that they want? Who needs help with hiring and firing? Who needs help with just making good strategic decisions and getting information out of our data systems? And how are our financials working? And how do we actually present all that information so that all of our key stakeholders can make the best decisions that they can at the end of the day, whether that's our board, whether that's our leadership team, our executive director. And so in 2019, I went out on my own, and my first client was a nonprofit. So I've just kind of been intertwined with nonprofits ever since. And we work with Fortune 500 companies now, but we never want to forget, especially about like some of the smaller businesses and smaller nonprofits, because we've been there. We've been that company. So we know what it's like to have a budget below $5 million or a budget below $10 million. And so we know how scrappy you have to be and how people are doing multiple jobs. And so we've lived that life. We've also grown out of that life, but we try to make sure that we've always got an offering that's available, not just to the $50 to $100 million, revenue organizations, but also there's a way that we can reach down to a few of the everyday nonprofits that we love that are doing really crazy, impactful stuff. And usually you've got an executive director doing 3, 4, 5 jobs. And those are the people that we want to help, go from, having a $500K budget to having $1 million budget. That's really hard to do that. So that's kind of how we ended up getting into the nonprofit sector. And, now we work with both.
So there are 3 threads there that I want to pull on. The first one was, I love the idea of challenging status quo. The phrase, this is how it's always done, or this is how everyone does it, to me is when I really start to crack a smile, because I love challenging that statement. And the answer might be, great, this is actually the right way to do it. Or more often than not, it's, well, let's take a double look at that to make sure that's actually true. So the whole idea of getting past that surface statement to see, what do they really mean by that? And does it really fit what they're trying to do? I think is a really important and healthy question to ask.
Yeah, that's really good.
Second thing was the general idea of, one thing I think is important is there's a lot of people that don't necessarily start from in the nonprofit space from the beginning, and being able to leverage the information learned, the lessons learned, practices, all this kind of information that comes from outside of the nonprofit sector, it can be applied for the most part into the nonprofit sector. Nonprofits, I think, have to learn or remember to learn that not everything should be taken from the nonprofit industry, that there are some elements from the for-profit industry that can be very relevant and very useful in the nonprofit industry. So moving from fundraising to finance, from trading to nonprofit, I think there's a lot of knowledge that comes with you that you're able then to pass on to the nonprofit. And then the third one was, I guess, where we're going with this conversation is the organization of things, the teams, the getting good info. So that's where I wanted to go next. But before I did, I want to make sure that if you had any comments on what I said for those first 2 points.
Yeah, I think I would just I'll highlight on the first one, I think I really like the way that you captured the spirit of the statement of like, it's not automatically assuming that it's wrong. You could unpack all of the assumptions and it might be like, yeah, this is exactly the right way. It's really taking that time to step back and make sure. And usually the way that we find out is in a really community-led way, especially with nonprofits. But for profits, just replace community and put client, you know? And so by actually spending time with the people who are interacting with your product, service, program, whatever it is that you're delivering, like that's how we're going to find out how to test some of those underlying assumptions that we're making about how they are utilizing, enjoying, not utilizing the programs and services that we're delivering.
Yep, very good point. So let's go then to the third one, building the teams, getting the organization going. There was one thing, there's a lot we can cover here, but let's start with what would be your basic formula for building long-term value in terms of a organization of a nonprofit?
Yeah, so in the 4 years that we were testing all of our assumptions and kind of pulling apart the way that people provide strategic advice to nonprofits and for-profits and kind of trying to put that back together, we realized a few things. And one of the things is that you've kind of got the big kind of consulting firms that really the way that they divide things up is, you know, some people give strategic advice, some people implement, and some people help with like, you know, outsource services and things like that. So there's kind of like nobody is covering kind of all of it. They kind of like separate all the things out. I kind of say it's like so they have plausible deniability, so they weren't the ones why the project didn't work. And then on the smaller end, a lot of times you have kind of like one person or two person kind of consulting teams. And sometimes that'll be somebody who has industry expertise, and that's probably not the person that I'm talking about. Those people generally, like if they've been in a seat and have a lot of like specialized expertise to offer, sometimes that can be good. But a lot of times it's kind of like more of a coach than it is a consultant. And coaches are really, really good for some of the like ongoing support as you're making decisions, but where they're not as applicable as when you're trying to like figure out your strategic position. And so as we've kind of pulled apart how services are provided, it's kind of forced us to have a little bit more of a holistic view of an organization. So that's what leads to sort of like what we think our formula is for building long-term value. And so there's four kind of components that we think to go into that. One is we have to have a healthy team. If we don't have a healthy team, it's not going to matter what strategy we put out on the table. We're not going to be able to execute it. We have to be able to make decisions and kind of support those decisions as we're making them. So we think wise decision making is another piece. And actually delivering at the end of the day, what we call it productive outcomes. So this is actually delivering a product or service to a market that people want and are willing to pay for, that leads to something productive. And so that's kind of another component. And then our last one is that we actually have to be aligned with the market conditions and industry conditions that we're in. It's really hard to swim against the currents. And so there are every now and then an organization that can kind of swim against the current to create a new market or create a new industry. So I'm not saying that that's not possible, but for most people out there who are delivering a product or service, you want kind of those aligned conditions. And you want to make sure that you're aligning your organization, the way you make decisions, the way you structure your teams, the way you build your products with those external conditions and what your kind of community and clients ultimately want at the end of the day. So our formula is, and this shouldn't be surprising based on what I just said, healthy teams that make wise decisions and deliver productive outcomes into aligned conditions build long-term value. So we think that's like the purpose of a business or the purpose of a nonprofit is doing that to build long-term value.
So let's break that down then, the four elements a little bit, just to give us an idea of what that practically means. So when you say wise decisions, how do you know what is a wise decision, what isn't? You know, how do you how do you foster an environment where decisions can be made? Like, is it a matter of coming up with a whole bunch of ideas as a team, kind of in a workshop, just brainstorming, whiteboarding, coming up with certain things, and then from those choosing the ones that are best aligned with what you're trying to do? That, you know, you kind of promote one of those items to this is the best decision for us going forward? Or is it something more encompassing? You know, how would you basically create an environment to be able to create these wise decisions or come up with these wise decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. And so these kind of four pillars that we talk about, and basically they break down into strategic positioning, organizational health, operational effectiveness, and then kind of your economic context that you're in. And they're all really intertwined. So your ability to do any one of these really, really well is it can be hindered if any one area is kind of especially weak. And so each one of these we break down kind of into three areas, which ultimately results in kind of 12 of what we think are like these essential building blocks towards a healthy organization that's going to deliver long-term value. So on the strategic positioning side, how do we make wise decisions? We break that down into one is our purpose and having a really clear idea of why this company exists, why these values are the ones that we picked. A reason that that's really, really important. And I know that sometimes like spending time to define your purpose and spending time to define your values and then see how those are reflected in an organization can feel kind of like, oh, that feels kind of hokey, or doesn't everybody already know that? And maybe one quick note on that is that a teammate's ability to understand and align with a company's purpose is one of the number one reasons that an employee is either happy or unhappy or engaged or not engaged in the workplace. So every company has a gap there between kind of our like stated culture, who we say we are, who we say why we exist, and what we actually do on any given day. What are the beliefs and behaviors that we actually display? And so every company has a gap. We have a gap. Alex, you have a gap. Other companies have a gap. It's just how big is that gap? Because the bigger that gap is of where I'm able to see myself in the purpose of this organization, I'm able to look at my peers and see my peers resonating with that also. And then noticing that the people holding me accountable, my boss at the organization, is measuring my activities based on those stated purposes and goals and values is the number one reason that I'm going to be happy or unhappy. And so I think starting right there with our purpose is going to help us as we're aligning decisions with that purpose, is automatically going to start leading to a culture where people kind of can see themselves in it and become more engaged. So that's the first one. The second piece of what we think goes into the strategic positioning piece is how do we use data and analytics for decision making? And so typically that data is going to be coming from somewhere on the operational side as we're measuring kind of our products or kind of our finances and things like that, which we'll get to kind of in another pillar. But it's really how does that data flow up to the decision makers at an organization? How is it transparent? How do we decide how much information throughout the organization people are supposed to have their fingertips on? How do we put that information not just in front of kind of the executive director, but also the people who are closest to a problem, who are making decisions on a day-to-day basis? We talk a lot about data-driven decision making, but a lot of times it leads organizations to kind of just like hoover up as much data as possible, and then all of a sudden they're kind of drowning in data, and they're not able to actually get there to extract insights. So to us, insights are different than just data, and so how do we use data in our analytical systems in order to actually put that information in front of the right people at the right time? And then the last one, we just went all in on decisions. And so we said, what bets are we making that we think are going to drive long-term value? I think sometimes we kid ourselves into kind of believing that we've made decisions that we haven't made. And so I think when we can sit around a table and say, these are the decisions we're following, we're all aligned with these right now, we're going to measure how they do. And then as time goes on, we're going to come back to this table and say, how is that decision performing for us? 3 months have gone by. Is this leading towards the outcome that we want? Are we willing to come and say, hey, maybe that's a decision that we can actually reverse and do a different, take a different path? And so I think there's a lot of times there's a challenge in an executive director perhaps might think they made a decision and no one else maybe realized that the decision was made and everyone wasn't swimming in the same direction. Or a lot of times we see this more with for-profits than nonprofits, is that decisions will get made in a boardroom and people will kind of just go on believing in their old thing because they disagreed and they didn't speak up in the meeting, but they decided that they were going to still kind of pursue this other thing. So um, you learn as you're like growing and scaling a company that your ability to make decisions and follow them on a team as a team and align with them is actually more important than getting the decisions right every time. And I know that sounds maybe counterintuitive, but sometimes it's okay to get a decision wrong because you were able to test it and you fully followed that path and then you were able to pivot into the right decision and move forward. But if you kind of like don't have an ability to make decisions quickly as you're growing and scaling an organization, or you have people who are kind of like pursuing different paths at the same time, then that ultimately then leads to not really knowing which decision was the right one, and you kind of are your growth path is considerably slowed down. So those are kind of the three pieces of sort of strategic positioning.
I love that feedback loop where just because you're making a decision today doesn't mean you have to stick with that decision forever, that you can come back after a certain period of time, look at the new data, look at the new situation, and decide to course correct or not. It's not like it's a set and done type of situation. You have that mechanism in place to adjust as needed. I think it's a really important thing to keep in mind. That's because you're right. I mean, people can make the wrong decisions, and you will learn that as you go along. So I agree with your point. Not to think that decisions are final.
Absolutely.
I also love that team alignment portion as well, in the sense of making sure that the team is aware of the decisions being made and agrees with the decisions being made, because every single organization that I see works really well. It's because the whole team is rowing in the same direction. You're on the same boat, you're all rowing in the rowboat, and you might not be going to the most accurate or the best destination, but you're all going there together, and you can course correct literally like a ship to get you to where you need to be. But more importantly is making sure that everyone's rowing in that direction and not that direction. And I'm pointing in two different directions. Absolutely. I know you can't see me.
Absolutely. You can't go two directions at once. And so that's the nice thing so when we make decisions, we say, how reversible is this decision and how much does it cost us to reverse this decision? And if it's reversible and doesn't cost us that much to make a decision, I'm going to tell my manager to make a call and I support them, right? Like, let's go that way. I positioned you in this role because I believe that you were able to make management level decisions. That sounds good to me. I'm going to do everything I can to support you in going that direction. And then we're going to measure how it went. And if it doesn't go well, we knew that it was reversible and wasn't going to cost us much to reverse it. It's the ones that aren't reversible or cost a lot to reverse them, either in time or money, that we want to be a little bit more careful when we make them.
I mean, just off the top of your head, I would gather that most decisions are reversible, like 80% or higher. Is that too high a number? Does that make sense? Or does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I don't remember what the statistic is, but I think we make like thousands of decisions a day, right? So everyone's making decisions throughout a day. And I think that there is more of a psychological barrier to feeling like a decision is permanent than there is actually permanence to a decision. And I think that's because at the end of the day, like, we're people. And so when we're sitting in a boardroom and we have, 40% of the room is going one way and 60% of the room is going the other way, and we think this is our chance to finally, make a decision to go our direction. And we feel like if the decision is yes or no, and the decision is no for now, it feels like no forever. And so I think that's one thing that I think is really helpful for teams also, when you have to decide at the end of the day, like, which 3 to 5 things are you going to follow? And you can't do all 10 things. And so sometimes if something was thing number 6 and it didn't make the cut for the 3 to 5 things we're going to follow right now, people psychologically feel this like uneasiness that, hey, that was my thing I really cared about, and now we're not doing it. When in reality, if we can map that out over 5 years and show someone that, hey, we have to follow these 3 to 5 things for now, but your bucket number 6, that thing you really care about, that it's not no for now, it's not no forever. It's just no for now. That's going to come in, Q2 of 2025 or whatever. And so, yes, most decisions we feel like we see are very reversible. They're less human reversible. I think coming back to the table to face a decision and change it, you really have to develop and flex that discipline to show your willingness and ability as a team to come back and course correct, as you put it.
So that's a pretty good summary for decisions. I know we could talk much more about it, but I want to move on to the second topic, which is healthy teams. You mentioned you have three, you break that down into the three subpoints. So I'm curious to know what they are.
Yeah, absolutely. So purpose from our kind of strategic positioning bucket really flows right into our first bucket of organizational health, which is culture. So our purpose is going to really set what is our organizational narrative? How do we talk about what we do? What are our common set of sort of beliefs and behaviors that we display and show on a daily basis? So that's kind of showing like how are we interacting with each other. The second one is just people. So how do we attract talent? How do we train them? How do we motivate them? How do we keep them? And then how do we measure that they're performing or not performing? And that last one can be a difficult one, I think, for organizations, especially small ones, as you're kind of growing and training leaders, along with growing and training the rest of the folks that are working at the organization. And I think especially we work with a lot of multicultural teams. So some of our clients are in 30 or 40 countries. And the idea of measuring performance looks a little bit different in a lot of those different places. And so how do you make sure that you're sort of like right fitting your people approach to the context that your people are in? And then the last one is in just overall structure. And so what we notice, I think, most with nonprofit organizations is actually they typically have really, really good people. It's usually people who could do a lot of different things with their careers, and they have seen this opportunity to really live in their mission and live in their purpose, and deliver value to a community that probably would not otherwise have it. And so you usually have really good, really smart people at nonprofits. And then where we see things break down usually is around structure. So how do we set up the roles for each person? How is it really clear, like who reports to who gets to make decisions on what? What does governance look like? How do we set up our board? How do we make sure that, like, as we're trying to deliver this meaningful value to a community and make their lives better, that we're actually retaining a positive culture for our team? That's really, really hard because a lot of people at organizations, really smart, really good people, are sacrificing a lot. Maybe they're making less money than they could otherwise make. Maybe they're working more hours than they would otherwise work. And that's a really meaningful sacrifice that we take really seriously. We really care a lot. And I think when we come alongside like an executive director, we see this a lot with organizations kind of under 5 million, where, an executive director or maybe a couple key leaders are on total life support. And so we end up having some pretty candid conversations with their boards about, these are your two most important people at this organization. And how do we make sure that as we all care about this population that we're serving, how do we make sure that we're really truly taking care of our key leaders? Because that's going to roll down to the key leaders being able to take care of the people at the organization. And so how do we honor the sacrifices that they're making and create a culture that is really serving them as well, and that they're not just serving, but also being served? And so that's people, structure, culture are our three pieces of organizational health that we really focus a lot on, especially with nonprofits.
The one thing I love working in the nonprofit space is because of the people. Like, that's one of the main reasons, is that it attracts a certain kind of person that is, I'm going to use the word, less selfish, that their focus, their energies is not about themselves and what it's about their impacts. How can they help the community? How are they helping the community, their fellow man? And that is a lovely thing. So I agree. I found that nonprofits have a lot of lovely people working for them because of that type of personality that it tends to attract. And then I'm curious, because you measure, that is definitely the most interesting part of this, because the first question I had is, measure it according to what, right? What are you exactly measuring? And how do you decide what to measure against, right? If you're measuring a physical thing, you can talk about its height, width, length, weight. But when you're talking about people, and especially people doing something, like obviously you're measuring some kind of performance, or typically I guess you would measure performance, but there could be other types of measurements. And it's trying to choose, and how do you choose which metrics to use to measure people against?
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is where that first piece of really making sure that the company is doing things on a daily basis that are pursuing its purpose is really important. Because then what we're measuring is actually our team's ability to deliver those outcomes. And so we can be measuring roles based on their ability to deliver outcomes, not just on like your sort of like personal development goals. So I love for teams to have, personal development goals, but it shouldn't all just be about, how good of a teammate are you? How good of an employee are you? It should be what outcomes are you delivering? And those outcomes then being aligned with the purpose of the organization, it makes it really, really, really clear. So when we do a strategy project with one of our nonprofit clients, we start with, what are those 3 to 5 things that we're pursuing? We break that down into all of the like kind of objectives that are going to be supporting that strategy. So now we've got kind of like 6 to 8 objectives per kind of 3 to 5 strategic, priorities that we're following. And then we break that down into all of the tasks and action steps that are going to be pursued over 3 to 5 years to make this strategy come to life. And so now we have broken this down into very tangible, very concrete things that we can now assign names next to. And we can do what's called a RACI chart, if you've heard of that. So who's responsible, accountable, consulted, informed for each one of these things that we're going to be tracking and following for the next 3 to 5 years. And if we do that well, we believe it will lead to this impact outcome and this financial outcome for our organization to sustainably continue to deliver impact over time. And so by doing that, by breaking things down in a really concrete way, then those measurement things get so much easier, because there's nothing worse than, being an employee and either not really feeling like what you do on a daily basis aligns with the company's mission or really delivers impact, or that you don't really know how you're being measured at the end of the day. And so I think that's a really important one that you brought up.
I love the focus on outcome. This to me is really a core pillar of my business, in that it's not how much time I spend doing something, it's what is the outcome of my work and my time. So I totally on board with focusing on that as measurements, not the inputs.
Mm.
So let's jump then, because I know each of these topics we could spend a lot of time on, but we are fortunately only able to cover just a surface level of these things, which is still fascinating to me. Number 3, predictive outcomes.
Awesome.
How would you divide those 3 or those into 3?
Yeah, so operational effectiveness, this one is much more straightforward. The other two take a little bit more to explain. So operational effectiveness is our products. So how do we research, develop, and what resources do we use to deliver our products, whether that is a nonprofit program, whether that is a service. Nonprofits can deliver services and products as well. So if we have earned revenue programs and things like that. Positioning, how do we position those? So how do we price our products and programs? How do we promote them? How do we support them? Do we have customer service that is supporting those as they go out? And then the last one is finance. So what is our regular financial reporting? How do we do forecasts? How do we do budgeting for key initiatives? And so that's a really key critical function, especially if we're going to be supporting some of those other organizational outcomes that we're looking for in sort of like, how do we make sure that we're able to pay our people well and things like that. That finance arm is really important for sustainability and for organizational health.
So from the perspective of a nonprofit, though, I would add the 4th one, which would be about impact to the community or some other mission-based element to it. Does that sometimes apply, or is it really mostly on the finance side?
Yeah, so I think through our, like, we just have a broad bucket for product, because sometimes that is a program which delivers impact, or sometimes that is a service or a product that delivers impact. And so,
okay.
So we would put that within there, but it does have to be measured, right? So we're measuring things, which I think gets to your point of making sure that we're actually seeing how our programs are performing, how they are reaching the goals. And so like every nonprofit organization probably has a relatively strong monitoring and evaluation program, making sure that they're actually able to capture and report that their programs are delivering what we hope they are. And so that needs to also come up through sort of this operational silo.
Yeah, thanks for that breakdown because sometimes I've seen organizations who are planning and tracking their impact. It's, how many meals did we serve today or this month or this year? Or how many people did we shelter today or this month or this year? And using those as metrics to figure out, what to do next, going back to that data-driven decision-making earlier, but also to see if they're able to supply the demand that's needed.
Yeah.
Okay, then that seems very straightforward. I'm happy to jump then to number 4, these aligned conditions.
Yeah, so our last pillar really has to do with everything outside of you. So the first 3 are all internal to the organization that you're in. The last one is really about the economic context around you. So the first one is customers. So what are the behaviors, beliefs, and decisions that your current and potential future customers on the for-profit side, or this would be like kind of your impact segment on the nonprofit side. So the people that you're serving. So what are their behaviors and beliefs about your product? What are their behaviors and beliefs about their own lives and about the way they go about their daily life and their family, friends, all of that kind of stuff. So who are they? What do they care about? All of that kind of sort of like market data. The second one is around the industry that we're in. So what is kind of the broad industry that our product, program, or service fits in? What do we believe some of those like projected changes are in the conditions that sort of affect the program that we're delivering and how maybe we compete or maybe we partner? Have there been any new innovations in our industry that are things that we should be taking advantage of as we continue to grow and evolve the program that we're delivering? And then the last one is just the broader economy. And this affects nonprofits, I think, in more than one way. So one is just kind of the economic factors that impact our kind of target population that we're working with. So how does that influence how they go about their life? How does that influence their need? How does that influence their opportunity? How does that influence sort of like their consumption of goods and services or likelihood to come and participate in a program or use a service that you're providing? But then nonprofits typically have it on the other side as well, which is the economy also affects donors. So how does that influence sort of the financial projections I'm making if I know that we're in a recession, or that I know that, large foundations are, typically, they have a lot of money invested in the S&P 500. And so if the S&P 500 is not performing well and not projected to perform well, how is that going to affect their grants in the upcoming year? So those are just things that you need to pay attention to. And for nonprofits, you kind of get it on both sides, where for a for-profit, typically the person paying them for something is also the person consuming that product. And so it's kind of only on one side for the for-profit. So it's going to be a unique thing for nonprofits. We kind of got it on both sides.
So 4 main categories, 12, break down them into 12, which are further broken down. I mean, this is a very comprehensive perspective analysis. So 4 main pillars, each broken down into 3, which is even further subdivided after that. I mean, this is a really comprehensive outlook, perspective analysis. I've met and I've spoken to people who focus on, maybe one of these 4 or one of these 12 even. I'm curious to know, how are you able to pull it off, so to speak? How are you able to get so comprehensive across so many different levels to be able to deliver all of this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. What we realized is that we didn't have a choice but to make sure that we were able to evaluate all of these different areas. And I think what this framework does more than anything is it gives people language and gives people areas of their business to look at, or areas of their nonprofit to look at and say, where do I think this pain is coming from? Or where do I think this opportunity lies? And so what we notice usually is that there's a change that an organization wants to make. There's a new product they want to pursue, or a program they want to build, or there's some stress that they're feeling or friction that they're feeling. And a lot of times, like, you're in the day to day, right? And you're trying to get things done. And it's really, really hard to identify exactly where that's coming from. And so the first thing was, let's just give the people in the seats the language to identify where this pain is coming from, or what's holding back the change that they want to see. And so that's where we found this to be really, really valuable, because of the comprehensive nature of it, that we were able to say, okay, let's look at the whole picture. And then what usually happens is many of these areas will be strong at an organization. And so we might feel like, man, we just can't make decisions. But then when we break it down, we realize that it has something to do with our reporting structures. And that's actually what's preventing us from being able to make decisions. And so kind of how these interact with each other becomes really important as well. And so I think when you again go back to something you said earlier that I think is spot on, is nonprofits have a lot of really good, really smart people at them. And so when you're able to kind of just help codify where these different challenges and opportunities lie, it actually, we can come along and partner in solving those challenges. And so we do have a multidisciplinary team, so we are able to cover a lot of these areas with a lot of detail. But I think usually what ends up happening is, let's say that the problem lay within the finance section. So I did spend 13 years in the trading industry. I know quite a bit about finance, but that organization probably has a really strong CFO. But the problem wasn't because the CFO wasn't good at their job. The problem was just because of how the finance silo was interacting with something else. So how do we actually unlock the skills and talents and wisdom of the people already at the organization and come alongside them and partner with them to start kind of like improving the way that these all kind of tie together. So there's kind of like invisible connections between all of these. And our what we've learned over the years is those connections were actually a bigger part of the barrier than the item, itself, or the category itself. So I don't have to be, I don't have to be the person that's like developing a new finance system for somebody. They actually have the guy or the gal who's like going to be able to do that, but I need to come alongside them and partner with them to make sure that the numbers that are coming out of it are effective. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. But if we did need to like say that, we need a new GL system, like maybe through this whole process, we were able to identify that the general ledger system at the organization wasn't effective. We're not going to be the people that are going to come lead an implementation to bring in a new GL system, but we do have partners that we can refer people to kind of get down into the weeds once we identify where some of those sources of pain are.
Since AI is really all the rage these days, I'm curious to know, in all of these activities, where do you see AI fitting? I mean, I can, at a first glance, the data-driven analytics that you mentioned at the very beginning as part of the wise decisions, analyzing data easily is something AI is great at. But I was curious to know if it has any other impact in any other element that we've spoken about so far.
Yeah. I think like, especially large language models, I think is kind of the next space that we're sort of seeing sort of permeate all of the different areas of an organization. So the biggest thing is probably speed. Like even something as simple as something like ChatGPT, or something where you've got like an internally created sort of question and answer thing where you're able to put the right information in it so that people can find out information quickly. Like those are some of the areas that I think are really just going to improve like speed and efficiency. I don't think it's going to make us, that on its own isn't going to make us better decision makers, but it will make us faster decision makers, just because it's going to bring the right information to us more quickly. I think that there's kind of every couple of years, there's something that's all the rage. And so I think all of those things, especially with AI, are important to like think about. How does this affect me? Are there areas of opportunity that we can take? But also, this is going to be an interesting, 15-year thing that we get to follow along with. And generally, the answer probably for the average nonprofit is probably not for it to build something AI driven, but for it to wait for a bunch of VC organization companies to spend a lot of money building something and specializing in it, and then to buy it off the shelf for $20 a month. So I think there's some areas where you should sort of lead into the next technology, and other areas where you're just looking out and seeing what are the new interesting integrations and products and services that people are providing in the AI space, especially with large language models that can be helpful for me to pull off the shelf after somebody else spent money on R&D for it.
Yeah, we're aligned on that. I don't think nonprofits should necessarily be the leading edge of technology. Let the market sort itself out, and then once the chips have fallen and the dust has settled, then they can reap the benefits of the ones that truly are the best of breed.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's some places, I especially think in, when you've got government and very large foundation or academia, like where they can partner together to really fund new things that the market would not otherwise pursue. Like that's where you can see sort of some of the non-for-profit money really leading the way in innovation. So I really love that. But yeah, the average for-profit or nonprofit organization probably isn't the one pushing on the edges of those things, rather waiting to see kind of what emerges. So yeah, I'm excited to see how that affects just efficiencies around how we position products, efficiencies around how we report data. And I think those are probably two of the bigger ones. I think also like analyzing market and industry is going to become easier and easier as data becomes more effective. And the biggest thing there is just pay attention to garbage in, garbage out, and inspect what the underlying assumptions are that a system is making before you trust kind of the outputs that are coming out of it.
Absolutely. So, Derek, we've covered lots of great information today. I'm sure people listening will have some questions. Where can they get in touch with you if they do?
Yeah, our team is all over LinkedIn. So we would love to connect with you on LinkedIn. Our company is OnCenter. It's one word, OnCenter, consulting. And you can find me at LinkedIn/in/Derek Kessen. So maybe you can put that in the show notes. But our team is there. All of us would love to connect with you and follow along with your story. That's kind of the thing. The big benefit that we get, especially with working with nonprofits, is we get to kind of be a very small part of following along with your story and the impact that you all are making. So that's kind of our joy in being able to partner with you. So we'd love to be able to follow those stories on LinkedIn.
Yeah, we'll definitely put those links in the show notes. Derek, thank you so much for joining me today.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.